Chapter 5 of The World Set Free by H.G. Wells. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Marsatich, June 2009, Alexandria, Virginia. The World Set Free by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 5th. The Last Days of Marcus Karenin. Section 6. About 11, Karenin had his midday meal, and afterwards he slept among his artificial furs and pillows for 2 hours. Then he awoke and some tea was brought to him, and he attended to a small difficulty in connection with the Moravian schools in the Labrador country and in Greenland that Gardner knew would interest him. He remained alone for a little while after that, and then the two women came to him again. Afterwards, Edwards and Kahn joined the group, and the talk fell upon love and the place of women in the renascent world. The cloud banks of India lay under a quivering haze, and the blaze of the sun fell full upon the eastward precipices. Ever and again as they talked, some vast splinter of rock would crack and come away from these, or a wild rush of snow and ice and stone, pour down in thunder, hang like a wet thread into the gulfs below, and cease. Section 7. For a time, Karenin said very little, and Kahn, the popular poet, talked of passionate love. He said that passionate, personal love had been the abiding desire of humanity since ever humanity had begun, and now only it was becoming a possible experience. It had been a dream that generation after generation had pursued, that always men had lost on the verge of attainment. To most of those who had sought it obstinately it had brought tragedy. Now, lifted above sordid distresses, men and women might hope for realized and triumphant love. This age was the dawn of love. Karenin remained downcast and thoughtful, while Kahn said these things. Against that continued silence, Kahn's voice presently seemed to beat and fail. He had begun by addressing Karenin, but presently he was including Edith Haydon and Rachel Borkin in his appeal. Rachel listened silently. Edith watched Karenin and very deliberately avoided Kahn's eyes. "I know," said Karenin at last, "that many people are saying this sort of thing. I know that there is a vast release of love-making in the world. This great wave of decoration and elaboration that has gone about the world, this efflorescence, has of course laid hold of that. I know that when you say that the world is set free, you interpret that to mean that the world is set free for love-making. Down there, under the clouds, the lovers foregather. I know your songs, Kahn, your half-mystical songs, in which you represent this old hard world dissolving into a luminous haze of love, sexual love. I don't think you are right or true in that. You are a young, imaginative man, and you see life, ardently, with the eyes of youth. But the power that has brought man into these high places under this blue-veiled blackness of the sky, and which beckons us on towards the immense and awful future of our race, is riper and deeper and greater than any such emotions. All through my life, it has been a necessary part of my work. I have had to think of this release of sexual love, and the riddles that perfect freedom and almost limitless power will put to the soul of our race. I can see now, all over the world, a beautiful ecstasy of waste. Let us sing and rejoice and be lovely and wonderful. The orgy is only beginning, Kahn. It was inevitable, but that is not the end of mankind. Think what we are. It is but a yesterday in the endlessness of time that life was a dreaming thing, dreaming so deeply that it forgot itself as it dreamt, its lives, its individual instincts, its moments, were born and wondered and played and desired and hungered and grew weary, and died. Incalculable successions of visions of sunlit jungle, river wilderness, wild forest, eager desire, beating hearts, soaring wings and creeping terror, flamed hotly, and then were as though they had never been. Life was an uneasiness across which lights played and vanished. And then we came, man came, and opened eyes that were a question and hands that were a demand, and began a mind and memory that dies not when men die, but lives and increases forever, an overmind, a dominating will, a question and an aspiration that reaches to the stars. Hunger and fear and this that you make so much of, this sex, are but the elementals of life out of which we have arisen. All these elementals, I grant you, have to be provided for, dealt with, satisfied, but all these things have to be left behind. But love, said Khan. I speak of sexual love and the love of intimate persons, and that is what you mean, Khan. Karenin shook his head. You cannot stay at the roots and climb the tree, he said. No, he said after a pause. This sexual excitement, this love story, is just a part of growing up, and we grow out of it. So far literature and art and sentiment and all our emotional forms have been almost altogether adolescent, plays and stories, delights and hopes. They have all turned on that marvelous discovery of the love interest, but life lengthens out now, and the mind of adult humanity detaches itself. Poets who used to die at 30 live now to 85. You too, Khan. There are endless years yet for you, and all full of learning. We carry an excessive burden of sex and sexual tradition still, and we have to free ourselves from it. We do free ourselves from it. We have learned in 1,000 different ways to hold back death, and this sex, which in the old barbaric days was just sufficient to balance our dying, is now like a hammer that has lost its anvil. It plunges through human life. You poets, you young people want to turn it to delight. Turn it to delight. That may be one way out. In a little while, if you have any brains worth thinking about, you will be satisfied, and then you will come up here to the greater things. The old religions and their new offsets want still, I see, to suppress all these things. Let them suppress, if they can suppress, in their own people. Either road will bring you here at last to the eternal search for knowledge and the great adventure of power. But incidentally, said Rachel Borkin, incidentally, you have half of humanity. You have womankind, very much specialized for this love and reproduction that is so much less needed than it was. Both sexes are specialized for love and reproduction, said Karenin. But the women carry the heavier burden. Not in their imaginations, said Edwards. And surely, said Khan, when you speak of love as a phase, isn't it a necessary phase? Quite apart from reproduction, the love of the sexes is necessary. Isn't love, sexual love, which has released the imagination? Without that, sir, without that impulse to go out from ourselves, to be reckless of ourselves and wonderful, would our lives be anything more than the contentment of the stalled ox? The key that opens the door, said Karenin, is not the goal of the journey. But women! cried Rachel. Here we are! What is our future, as women? It is only that we have unlocked the doors of the imagination for you men. Let us speak of this question now. It is a thing constantly in my thoughts, Karenin. What do you think of us? You who must have thought so much of these perplexities. Karenin seemed to weigh his words. He spoke very deliberately. I do not care a rap about your future as women. I do not care a rap about the future of men as males. I want to destroy these peculiar futures. I care for your future as intelligences, as parts of and contribution to the universal mind of the race. Humanity is not only naturally over-specialized in these matters, but all its institutions, its customs, everything exaggerate, intensify this difference. I want to unspecialize women. No new idea. Plato wanted exactly that. I do not want to go on as we go now, emphasizing this natural difference. I do not deny it, but I want to reduce and overcome it. And we remain women, said Rachel Borkin. Need you remain thinking of yourselves as women? It is forced upon us, said Edith Hayden. I do not think a woman becomes less of a woman because she dresses and works like a man, said Edwards. You women here, I mean you scientific women, wear white clothing like the men, twist up your hair in the simplest fashion, go about your work as though there was only one sex in the world. You are just as much women, even if you are not so feminine, as the fine ladies down below there in the plains, who dress for excitement and display, whose only thoughts are of lovers, who exaggerate every difference. Indeed, we love you more. But we go about our work, said Edith Hayden. So does it matter? Asked Rachel. If you go about your work, and if the men go about their work, then for heaven's sake, be as much women as you wish, said Karenin. When I ask you to unspecialize, I am thinking not of the abolition of sex, but the abolition of the irksome, restricting, obstructive obsession with sex. It may be true that sex made society, that the first society was the sex-centered family, the first state a confederacy of blood relations, the first laws sexual taboos. Until a few years ago, morality meant proper sexual behavior. Up to within a few years of us, the chief interest and motive of an ordinary man was to keep and rule a woman and her children, and the chief concern of a woman was to get a man to do that. That was the drama, that was the life, and the jealousy of these demands was the master motive in the world. You said, Con, a little while ago, that sexual love was the key that let one out from the solitude of self. But I tell you that, so far, it has only done so in order to lock us all up again in a solitude of two. All that may have been necessary, but it is necessary no longer. All that has changed, and changes very swiftly. Your future, Rachel, as women, is a diminishing future. Karenin, asked Rachel, do you mean that women are to become men? Men and women have to become human beings. You would abolish women? But Karenin, listen! There is more than sex in this. Apart from sex, we are different from you. We take up life differently. Forget we are females, Karenin. And still we are a different sort of human being with a different use. In some things we are amazingly secondary. Here am I in this place because of my trick of management, and Edith is here because of her patient, subtle hands. That does not alter the fact that nearly the whole body of science is man-made. That does not alter the fact that men do so predominatingly make history, that you could nearly write a complete history of the world without mentioning a woman's name. And on the other hand, we have a gift of devotion, of inspiration, a distinctive power for truly loving beautiful things, a care for life, and a peculiar keen close eye for behavior. You know men are blind beside us in these last matters. You know they are restless and fitful. We have a steadfastness. We may never draw the broad outlines nor discover the new paths, but in the future isn't there a confirming and sustaining and playing role for us? As important, perhaps, as yours? Equally important. We hold the world up, Karenin, though you may have raised it. You know very well, Rachel, that I believe as you believe. I am not thinking of the abolition of women, but I do want to abolish the heroine, the sexual heroine. I want to abolish the woman whose support is jealousy, and whose gift possession. I want to abolish the woman who can be won as a prize, or locked up as a delicious treasure, and away down there the heroine flares like a divinity. In America, said Edwards, men are fighting duels over the praises of women, and holding tournaments before queens of beauty. I saw a beautiful girl in Lahore, said Khan. She sat under a golden canopy like a goddess, and 3 fine men, armed and dressed like the ancient paintings, sat on steps below her to show their devotion, and they wanted only her permission to fight for her. That is the men's doing, said Edith Hayden. I said, cried Edwards, that man's imagination was more specialized for sex than the whole being of women. What women would do a thing like that? Women do but submit to it or take advantage of it. There is no evil between men and women that is not a common evil, said Karenin. It is you poets, Khan, with your love songs which turn the sweet fellowship of comrades into this women-centered excitement. But there is something in women, in many women, which responds to these provocations. They succumb to a peculiarly self-cultivating egotism. They become the subjects of their own artistry. They develop and elaborate themselves as scarcely any man would ever do. They look for golden canopies, and even when they seem to react against that, they may do it still. I have been reading in the old papers of the movements to emancipate women that were going on before the discovery of atomic force. These things which began with a desire to escape from the limitations and servitude of sex, ended in an inflamed assertion of sex, and women more heroines than ever. Helen of Holloway was at last a big nuisance in her way as Helen of Troy, and so long as you think of yourselves as women. He held out a finger at Rachel and smiled gently. Instead of thinking of yourselves as intelligent beings, you will be in danger of Hellenism. To think of yourselves as women is to think of yourselves in relation to men. You can't escape that consequence. You have to learn to think of yourselves, for our sakes, and your own sakes, in relation to the sun and stars. You have to cease to be our adventure, Rachel, and come with us upon our adventures. He waved his hand towards the dark sky above the mountain crests. Section 8. These questions are the next questions to which research will bring us answers, said Karenin. While we sit here and talk idly and inexactly of what is needed and what may be, there are hundreds of keen-witted men and women who are working these things out, dispassionately and certainly, for the love of knowledge. The next sciences to yield great harvest now will be psychology and neural physiology. These perplexities of the situation between man and women, and the trouble with the obstinacy of egotism, these are temporary troubles, the issue of our own times. Suddenly all these differences that have seemed so fixed will dissolve, all these incompatibilities will run together, and we shall go on to mold our bodies and our bodily feelings and personal reactions as boldly as we begin now to carve mountains and set the seas in their places and change the currents of the wind. It is the next wave, said Fowler, who had come out upon the terrace and seated himself silently behind Karenin's chair. Of course, in the old days, said Edwards, men were tied to their city or their country, tied to the homes they owned or the work they did. "I do not see," said Karenin, "that there is any final limit to man's power of self-modification." "There is none," said Fowler, walking forward and sitting down upon the parapet in front of Karenin so that he could see his face. "There is no absolute limit to either knowledge or power. I hope you do not tire yourself talking." "I am interested," said Karenin. "I suppose in a little while men will cease to be tired. I suppose in a little time you will give us something that will hurry away the fatigue products and restore our jaded tissues almost at once. This old machine may be made to run without slacking or cessation." "That is possible, Karenin, but there is much to learn." "And all the hours we give to digestion and half living, don't you think there will be some way of saving these?" Fowler nodded assent. "And then sleep again. When man with his blazing lights made an end to night in his towns and houses, it is only 100 years or so ago that was done. Then it followed he would presently resent his 8 hours of uselessness. Shan't we presently take a tabloid, or lie in some field of force that will enable us to do with an hour or so of slumber, and rise refreshed again? Frobisher and Amir Ali have done work in that direction." "And then the inconveniences of age and those diseases of the system that come with years, steadily you drive them back, and you lengthen and lengthen the years that stretch between the passionate tumults of youth and the contractions of senility. Man who used to weaken and die as his teeth decayed, now looks forward to a continually lengthening, continually fuller term of years, and all those parts of him that once gathered evil against him, the vestigial structures and odd treacherous corners of his body, you know better and better how to deal with. You carve his body about and leave it remodeled and unscarred. The psychologists are learning how to mold minds, to reduce and remove bad complexes of thought and motive, to relieve pressures and broaden ideas, so that we are becoming more and more capable of transmitting what we have learned, and preserving it for the race. The race, the racial wisdom, science, gather power continually to subdue the individual man to his own end. Is that not so?" Fowler said that it was, and for a time he was telling Karenin of new work that was in progress in India and Russia. "And how is it with heredity?" asked Karenin. Fowler told him of the mass of inquiry accumulated and arranged by the genius of Techin, who is beginning to define clearly the laws of inheritance, and how the sex of children, and the complexions and many of the parental qualities could be determined. "He can actually do? It is still, so to speak, a mere laboratory triumph," said Fowler. "But tomorrow it will be practicable." "You see!" cried Karenin, turning a laughing face to Rachel and Edith, "while we have been theorizing about men and women, here is science getting the power for us to end that old dispute forever. If woman is too much for us, we'll reduce her to a minority, and if we do not like the type of men and women, we'll have no more of it. These old bodies, these old animal limitations, all this earthly inheritance of gross inevitabilities, falls from the spirit of man, like a shriveled cocoon from an imago. And for my own part, when I hear of these things, I feel like a wet, crawling new moth that still fears to spread its wings. Because where do these things take us?" "Beyond humanity," said Khan. "No," said Karenin, "we can still keep our feet upon the earth that made us, but the air no longer imprisons us. This round planet is no longer chained to us like the ball of a galley slave. In a little while, men who will know how to bear the strange gravitations, the altered pressures, the attenuated, unfamiliar gases, and all the fearful strangeness of space, will be venturing out from this earth. This ball will be no longer enough for us. Our spirit will reach out. Cannot you see how that little argosy will go glittering up into the sky, twinkling and glittering smaller and smaller until the blue swallows it up? They may succeed out there, they may perish, but other men will follow them. It is as if a great window opened, said Karenin. Section 9. As the evening drew on, Karenin and those who were about him went upon the roof of the buildings, so that they might the better watch the sunset, and the flushing of the mountains and the coming of the afterglow. They were joined by two of the surgeons from the laboratories below, and presently by a nurse who brought Karenin refreshment in a thin glass cup. It was a cloudless, windless evening under the deep blue sky, and far away to the north glittered two biplanes on the way to the observatories on Everest, 200 miles distant over the precipices to the east. The little group of people watched them pass over the mountains and vanish into the blue, and then for a time they talked of the work that the observatory was doing. From that they passed to the whole process of research about the world, and so Karenin's thoughts returned again to the mind of the world, and the great future that was opening upon man's imagination. He asked the surgeons many questions upon the detailed possibilities of their science, and he was keenly interested and excited about the things they told him. And as they talked, the sun touched the mountains, and became very swiftly a blazing and indented hemisphere of liquid flame, and sank. Karenin looked blinking at the last quivering rim of incandescence, and shaded his eyes and became silent. Presently he gave a little start. "What?" asked Rachel Borkin. "I had forgotten," he said. "What had you forgotten?" "I had forgotten about the operation tomorrow. I have been so interested as man today, that I have nearly forgotten Marcus Karenin. Marcus Karenin must go under your knife tomorrow, Fowler, and very probably Marcus Karenin will die." He raised his slightly shriveled hand. "It does not matter, Fowler. It scarcely matters even to me. For indeed it is Karenin who has been sitting here and talking. Is it rather not a common mind, Fowler, that is played about between us? You and I and all of us have added thought to thought, but the thread is neither you nor me. What is true we all have. When the individual has altogether brought himself to the test and winnowing of expression, then the individual is done. I feel as though I had already been emptied out of that little vessel, that Marcus Karenin, which in my youth held me so tightly and completely. Your beauty, dear Edith, and your broad brow, dear Rachel, and you, Fowler, with your firm and skillful hands, are now almost as much to me as this hand that beats the arm of my chair, and as little me. And the spirit that desires to know, the spirit that resolves to do, that spirit that lives and has talked in us today, lived in Athens, lived in Florence, lives on, I know, forever. And you, old sun, with your sword of flame, searing these poor eyes of Marcus, for the last time of all, beware of me. You think I die, and indeed I am only taking off one more coat to get at you. I have threatened you for 10,000 years, and soon I warn you I shall be coming, when I am altogether stripped and my disguises thrown away. Very soon now, old sun, I shall launch myself at you, and I shall reach you and I shall put my foot on your spotted face, and tug you about your fiery locks. One step I shall take to the moon, and then I shall leap at you. I've talked to you before, old sun, I have talked to you 1,000,000 times, and now I am beginning to remember. Yes, long ago, before I had stripped off a few thousand generations, dust now and forgotten, I was a hairy savage and pointed my hand at you, and clearly I remember it. I saw you in a net. Have you forgotten that, old sun? Old sun, I gather myself together out of the pools of the individual that have held me dispersed so long. I gather my 1,000,000,000 thoughts into science, and my 1,000,000 wills into a common purpose. Well may you slink down behind the mountains from me, well may you cower. Section 10. Karenin desired that he might dream alone for a little while before he returned to the cell in which he was to sleep. He was given relief for a pain that began to trouble him, and wrapped warmly about with furs, for a great coldness was creeping over all things, and so they left him, and he sat for a long time watching the afterglow give place to the darkness of night. It seemed to those who had to watch over him unobtrusively lest he should be in want of any attention, that he mused very deeply. The white and purple peaks against the golden sky sank down into cold blue remoteness, glowed out again and faded again, and the burning cressets of the Indian stars, that even the moonrise cannot altogether quench, began their vigil. The moon rose behind the towering screen of dark precipices to the east, and long before it emerged above these, its slanting beams had filled the deep gorges below with luminous mist, and turned the towers and pinnacles of Leo Porgil to a magic dream castle of radiance and wonder. Came upon a great uprush of ghostly light above the black rim of rocks, and then like a bubble that is blown and detaches itself, the moon floated off clear into the unfathomable dark sky. And then Karenin stood up. He walked a few paces along the terrace, and remained for a time gazing up at the great silver disk, that silvery shield that must needs be man's first conquest in outer space. Presently, he turned about and stood with his hands folded behind him, looking at the northward stars. At length he went to his own cell. He lay down there and slept peacefully till the morning, and early in the morning they came to him and the anesthetic was given him, and the operation performed. It was altogether successful, but Karenin was weak and he had to lie very still. And about 7 days later, a blood clot detached itself from the healing scar, and traveled to his heart, and he died in an instant in the night. End of The World Set Free by H. G. Wells. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Marsatich. June 2009, Alexandria, Virginia.